Exciting. Such a nice day.
And hey, is there like a reception for something else?
Yeah, there is. Sorry, it might be a little loud.
Okay.
I'm hoping not too much. They honestly didn't ask me before they put that there. Okay, guys. Your book was there? I believe they are. When I move some units. Yes.
Getting retired?
Yes. That's what I want. Yeah. Yeah.
Do the little intro. I'll just give
My
welcome.
mom's here.
Okay, shall we?
I'm glad you made it.
Actually, we should get everyone up there.
Yeah.
We'll go there.
Hi.
Actually.
Any last words of advice?
Say whatever is fun and great and
Yeah,
surprises.
I will.
Let
We're
yourself
gonna
be
close the
surprised.
doors.
Say things you wouldn't otherwise say.
Okay. I'll do my
That's
best.
the job.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
Yeah, you got water up there? Okay, good, thanks. I don't know what you're talking about. Sorry.
Good evening. Thank you guys so much for coming out to Hill Center this evening. My name is Eli Campbell. I'm the programming coordinator here. I would love to ask quickly, how many of you guys haven't been here before? Excellent. Hands across the room. That's good. Well, we're so glad you could join us this evening, and we hope that you will do so again. We have a great venue going here with events all the time. We do this Life of a Poet series 4 times a year in conjunction with the Library of Congress, but we do a lot of other great stuff. Coming up this weekend of special interest, we have our annual Emancipation Day Forum, named after the hospital's first patient, an African-American sailor named Benjamin Drummond. So we'll have lectures going on starting tomorrow night and throughout the rest of the weekend about African-American history and struggles. So it's going to be a lot of good, sort of in-depth educational stuff this weekend if you're free to join us here. But now I will turn it over to Rob Casper to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Eli. Ooh, hey, there's a new sound system. Doesn't it sound great? I'm so excited. I'm also turning off my phone, and you should too. Let me move out of the way. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out. We're so excited to see you here at the Hill Center. Well, we've been doing this quite a few times. This is our 17th. Very exciting. Thanks to Eli, who's manning the sound in the back, and to Charlotte and to the rest of the Hill Center staff for continuing to have us here hosting this terrific series. Of course, I want to thank the Washington Post too, and Ron Charles. Every event I try to say something new and wonderful about Ron, but I decided I was just going to say I really cannot say enough good things about Ron. You could try. So yeah, that's what you're in for tonight. The Poetry and Literature Center at the Library of Congress, we are home to the U.S. Poet Laureate. Our current Poet Laureate is Tracy K. Smith. She just got renewed for a second term. Worth checking her out. If you want to know more about the events that we do, most of which take place at the library down the street, but a few which take place here and around the country, you can go check out our website, www.loc.gov/poetry. Now I get to introduce one of my dearest and oldest friends, Matthew Zapruder. Matthew was born here, and in fact, he went to school just around the corner from my apartment. And Dawn, he went to the same high school that you teach at. So he wants to talk about some teachers you may have heard of back in those days. Our paths first crossed, though, far later when we were both graduate students at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Matthew was literally the first student I met at the program, the appointed greeter for incoming MFA students. He shook hands with anyone who, still slightly lost as I was, wandered into the grad student lounge. I could argue that in the years that followed, Matthew would find new and ever more powerful ways to welcome writers and readers to the art. There is his work as an editor of Verse Press Wave Books and as last year's editor of the poetry column for the New York Times Magazine, as well as his work as co-director of the Bagley Wright lecture series, which we've hosted at the library. All this work has done much to get poems and poetry criticism out into the world. Matthew has also written his own collection of poetry criticism, Why Poetry, published last year by Echo Press. It has received all sorts of praise, but let me just say I've never seen someone who's given more of his time and effort, or has spent as much of that time and effort worrying over every detail in arguing for the value of poems in our lives. And I am impressed by how Matthew weaved his own story of coming to poems as part of the book's argument. Finally, and most importantly for tonight, Matthew is the author of 4 terrific poetry collections: Sun Bear, Come On All You Ghosts, The Pajamaists, and American Linden. He also collaborated with painter Chris Uphughes, is that how I say it? Chris Uphughes, on For You in Full Bloom, and co-translated Romanian poet Eugen Jeblenau's last collection, Secret Weapon, Selected Late Poems. Matthew's honors include the William Carlos Williams Award from the Poetry Society of America, the May Sarton Prize from the Academy of American Arts and Letters, the Tupelo Press Editors Prize, and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the Lanham Foundation. He currently lives all the way across the country in Oakland, California, and is an associate professor at St. Mary's College. I have so many stories I could tell about Matthew, but for now, let me say something about his last book of poems, Sun Bear. I read the whole book in one fell swoop on a subway train back home to Brooklyn after a long week in DC. I'd been traveling for hours and was pretty sapped, yet I'll never forget how I floated page by page and stop by stop as if in a vehicle of another kind. It was the perfect way to experience his book among a car full of traveling strangers, each easy to ignore. But Matthew's poems made me think of how connected we all can be, how much we desire a way to speak and see and know each other. It's this great empathic charge that I think makes Matthew's poems so necessary. And I can't imagine a better person for him to engage with on poems and connection, and frankly, on how to live, than our dear Ron Charles. Please join me in welcoming them both.
Well, thank you very much. Can you all hear me? We didn't get a chance to test our mics. Are they on? Matthew, your mic on?
I don't know. Is it? I think mine's on.
I'm not on. That's because I project.
Let's see. Where's your? Now we'll see. Mine's on.
It's on.
Is it on standby? It's on mute.
Is it on mute? There you go. Okay, how's that? Now you can hear me. Okay, now I will not project. Thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's wonderful to meet you in person. I read your book of criticism, My Poetry, last year when Elizabeth Lund reviewed it for the Post. She loved it. And I had the pleasure of reading all your poems. And they're brilliant and humane and very provocative. But you said as a young person, you could never have imagined yourself being a professional poet. Why was that?
Oh, I just don't think I knew any poets, or it just wasn't even my realm of possibility. I mean, I think I was more interested in being a wide receiver for the Washington Redskins than a poet. So yeah, I just didn't think of that in any kind of way as being. I didn't think of writers as being really living beings. They were people who had written books, and they were either dead or functionally dead because they were away from me. And then when I got into music, that was different because I really got into music and playing music, and then got into the music scene here in DC. And then I met all kinds of people who made music and played in bands.
Were you writing lyrics?
I didn't really write lyrics. I'm not a very good songwriter. I play guitar. And so musicians were real people to me, but who were living and making the art now. But poets, I just don't think it just entered into my head that there was like a thing that people did.
In one poem you write, I grew up a wonderful sullen boy, close enough to the Capitol building to dream of hitting it with a stick, but did not.
Yeah, that sums it up.
Wonder if you'd read a poem by
Sure.
us called "Tonight You'll Be Able."
Yeah. Sure. Tonight you'll be able. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Tonight you'll be able. It may feel good to go wherever. Desires lead you into old, familiar, destructive awareness. Going 1,000 miles away seems to be keeping up. Unsettled and anxious signals, they're so microscope. Be a sleuth. Tiny sparkling under those around you sees you feeling and waiting. Life today is slow-moving coworkers. Respond by giving your profile a new sense of clarity and feel ready to share your outlook, even if they may not be as excited. It makes you good to spread your joy. People, it's harder to be yourself. A series of role-playing opportunities appeases, showing the authentic you won't hurt anything. Focus on your lovely find that there are many more things. Tonight, you'll be able to talk to anyone about anything. Make all the loved ones muster up. Chat with character, keep alive the conversations. You feel you're getting something someone gives you. The key to a series of coincidences you play matchmaker to. An odd couple, the present you and the future in a big suit, a new haircut, or better than anticipated, funds. A few minor changes to June. Love partners, your lucky numbers are 4, 7, 18, 21, and 32. Ask yourself, what would I do if I knew I could not fail?
It's a lovely, hopeful poem.
Thanks. Do you want to know a secret about that poem, Ron?
Yes, I do. I will tell
All the
anyone.
language is from the horoscope. It's from two horoscopes in the Chicago Tribune. I was traveling, and I was sitting with my friend Joshua Beckman, and we were in a Polish kielbasa place, and we decided we were going to write a poem. And I had this newspaper, I had the Chicago Tribune, or sometimes one of the two Chicago papers in front of me, and they had two horoscopes, which struck me as very funny. That you would have two horoscopes. It seems like that creates immediate chaos. Like, why not one? It's hard enough as it is to know what to do. So I just started cutting out all the language of those things and rearranging it and made the poem out of those. So it's that's all language from horoscopes.
A found poem.
Yeah, well, that not really. I moved them around a lot,
Right.
but it's all that is. I think that's probably the only poem I've ever written like that. That's all found language like that.
That's amazing. Well, now you're a poet, but you're also a critic and an editor. How did that transition come to be from music?
Well, I tell the story about this in the Why Poetry book, but what happened is that I played music for a long time and was in different bands and sort of always secretly wanted to be a writer.
Yes.
But I hadn't really ever written anything. And I figured out, I went to graduate school for Slavic languages and literatures. I had been a Russian major in college, and then I went to UC Berkeley to get a PhD. And I knew pretty much right away that was not going to be my career path. Wasn't going to be a big success as a scholar. But I thought, well, if I want to be a writer, I should start writing. I better write.
Poems.
I didn't know. I just knew I needed to write. So I just sat down at a desk and basically started writing every day. I tried to write, and I wrote poems. It was very strange. I was studying Russian poetry at the time but it was very odd. I didn't think that was necessarily what was going to happen. And I started writing poems, and then once that started to happen, then I tried to figure out what was going on, what was happening with poetry and what it all meant and everything to educate myself.
You've got a poem called "This Handwriting."
Mm-hmm.
If you could read that.
Yeah.
It seems to have a lot to do
This
with...
is very exciting, by the way, because I have no idea what he's going to ask me to read. So it's really like...
Well, they're all yours. So you
Yeah,
have
that's
some-
true. So I have
some idea.
I have some idea, but yeah. This handwriting. This afternoon, I heard the small voice speaking again, though no one was there. I could not hear the words, though from the helpless, complicated tone, I knew it was something like, someday you will realize you already know you must go elsewhere to be free. Maybe the white island with just a few necessary buildings you saw once from above as if you were flying. All your friends in gentle, laughing disputation are already waiting. For now, I settle for trying to picture each of their faces. But when I close my eyes, I just keep seeing this horrible, actual sunny floor I've scattered pages of my handwriting on, searching for a pattern, and also this table. Upon it lies a yellow book containing a translation of the half-burned gospel that says often Jesus kissed Mary on the mouth. Reading it makes me feel as if the true future, like the son of a dethroned king, long ago hid in a cave, trying to silence his breathing. The great black indeterminate stallion pounded implacably by. Now there's only silence, like an auditorium after a modern composition has just finished perfectly destroying our foolish, cherished ideas of music. When I think very hard about my thoughts, they seem to me to be very small horses, attached to invisible reins, attached to facts. And what of my memories? Like sleeping in daylight. A decade ago, I lived in Massachusetts, a shallow, terrible installation, leaking smoky versions of myself, each in turn emitting weak, soluble ideas, like people care only because they do not even know they feel they must. And now I'm here in California, happy to be, though always part of me is thinking of my friends and their shadows, patiently waiting for my shadow to join them.
It seems like a poem about your writing, about searching for an identity. Pretty critical, self-critical.
Yeah.
The small horses of your ideas.
Yeah.
Searching for patterns, your weak, soluble ideas.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, well, I think, one thing about writing that's a terrible truth that I'm sure you must, I suspect you also know, a lot of people in this room know, is that, often you're not very interesting to yourself, or you have to go through a lot of kind of self-doubt and self-criticism and just feeling kind of not like you're particularly on your mark before something starts to happen. That's just part of it. I mean, maybe there are writers out there in the world who don't have to go through that. I've never met any. So that bringing that experience into the poem seemed more honest to me, and also a good opportunity to like make some jokes.
Yes.
But
At your own expense.
and feel low. And I think the other thing about writing is it can feel very lonely. And so I was feeling lonely in that poem, and then I was imagining my friends, but they keep kind of going away from me. Like they're not really there actually. All that's there is my crummy poem that I'm working on. But I have to just work through that. That's the thing. I think that's the thing you learn about writing is you just gotta grind it out. A lot of it's grinding it out. I mean, that's been said many different ways before, but it's true.
It taxes your confidence so dramatically, and yet it takes so much confidence to publish, to put these things out into the world, and then have them be critiqued, sometimes cruelly, tritely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, once they're done and they're gone, I mean, it stings to get criticized, but the first part, the feeling of going through that self-doubt and self-criticism, that's a million times worse to me. That's my experience. I mean, I don't, bad review, I mean, you can shake it off,
right.
But
because you've already done so much worse in your mind to yourself.
Right.
In a poem called Schwinn, you write, "I will never know a single thing anyone feels, just how they say it, which is why I'm standing here exactly, covered in shame and lightning, doing what I'm supposed to do."
Yeah. That's like a dramatic end of poem. That's kind of like the poem starts out with my bike getting stolen, and then sort of wanders around and then laments like the Redskins losing the Super Bowl and then to the Dolphins. And then, but the other end of the poem, I mean, that poem surprised me because the end of it is this almost statement of, it's a statement of my purpose as an artist.
Yes.
And it shocked me when I wrote it. I didn't think that's where the poem was going. I didn't say like, oh, I must write a poem in which I assert my right as a poet to do whatever. But I think that's just true. I don't actually know how people feel. I only know what they say, like on some kind of literal level. I mean, for the most part, except if it's your intimate partner or something, you have physical contact with them. But I mean, otherwise, I don't know anything about you except what you tell me. And that distance is both tragic and exciting. And so the recognition of that fact led me to this belief that, that's why I do this. Because I think that distance and that possibility of transmission is so exciting to me as a poet.
And for us as readers, to read a
Well,
poem
hopefully.
that speaks to you and to realize, oh my gosh, this person feels the same strange, inexpressible thing that I feel.
Hopeful, yeah, that's the hope. That's the idea. I mean, you don't know,
Right.
know, and when to, but you throw it out. You know, at some point you have to stand. You know, at some point you have to be really honest with yourself as a poet. You know, you can't bullshit. And then you're just yourself and your naked, ludicrous humanity, and like and saying the things that you seem true to you, and then if another person makes contact with that, it's like it's this amazing experience.
It is for readers too.
Yeah, well, I hope so. I mean, I felt that so many times on the other end of poems,
Right.
for sure. So
You've written this book recently, your latest book called Why Poetry, which I highly recommend, by the way. It's very smart, but very humble, very well informed. It includes lots of poems, and he talks about how to read poetry in a way that anybody who's beginning or experienced would profit from. I'm sure that's for sale out in the lobby. I really recommend that, in addition to the poems themselves. One of the poems in your collection begins, "People say they don't understand poetry." And it seems to me this essay collection you published is in response to that oft-repeated statement, right?
yeah.
Yeah. People carry so many incorrect ideas about poetry into their reading of it, ones that ruin the experience before they even get to have it. What are those incorrect ideas we have about poetry? Just off the top of your head from your experience teaching.
That the words in the poems don't mean what they seem to mean.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Yes.
That the language is coded,
Yes.
like and which is problematic because some of the words clearly do mean what they usually mean, but then if some don't, which ones are which, what do they mean, and who knows the answer? That's bad. That's not helpful. That seems like a pervasive idea that people have about poems. I've noticed it's totally wrong. Also, that the poems are always sort of about some big idea at the end, and there's some payoff of like deep wisdom that the poet has. That's also usually not the case. They're an experience or something that happens to you. And I think if people know who read, if you think about the poems you really love, or maybe even an experience you had with a poem you loved, it's more like a process. It's an experience of being changed by it. It's not just valuable because of what comes at the end, you know. So I think those are two, like right off the top of my head.
That's good. Let's think
No
about that
problem.
last one, what you just said, that the poem is not something that you wring until something valuable comes out of it,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that does sound unpleasant, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, torture the poem until it confesses.
Right.
Doesn't, I think somebody has a poem with Billy Collins has a poem, yeah. Good old Billy.
You talked about the poem as being an experience with language.
Yeah, or like a process. I mean, I compare it in the book to like a friendship or a conversation, especially maybe with a new friend. Sometimes a poem can feel that way.
Mhm.
Like you meet someone interesting and you go out for coffee or beer or with them or whatever, walk, and you're not like, oh, I can't wait until he says the one thing that's really going to be, you're sort of, you know, I don't think, I mean, maybe some of you do. That
Reveals the
so,
secret.
yeah, or like just, I hope, you know, I guess you could hope that the person says one interesting thing, I guess. But I mean, it's more like, oh, I'm enjoying being with this person. I'm feeling changed. I'm interested in what they're saying. They're revealing themselves. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I understand everything about them. And I'm completely done with this experience just after this one cup of coffee or beer or something. It's like the opposite should feel true, right? You should feel like, oh, that was great. Let's do that again. You know, and so I think poems should make you feel that way. They shouldn't be like, okay, now I know death is scary. or like, you know, being alone is a bummer. You know, thanks for the information. I mean, that's the other thing about poems is like the information in them is just so banal. You know, like when even like my favorite, you know, Ode to a Nightingale, death is scary. Like, thanks, Keats. I mean, that's not like, that's one of my favorite poems. That's not why I like that poem, because of the big reveal at the end, you know, like it's not that. I mean, and so that's why the teaching of poems is so annoying. If you look at the standardized tests, you know, where they ask you for the theme of the poem, it's the list of possibilities is usually just such a stupid list. I mean, like, that's the big message, you know? I mean, like, nature is worth preserving or something.
Right.
And, you know, I don't think I need to read a poem to know that, you know, but the feeling that nature's worth preserving, okay, that's different. Like, that's a feeling that's kind of cool. Like, if I read the poem and it makes me feel that way, okay, that's a whole different. If I feel like death is, brought closer to that fear of death in some kind of interesting way, I mean, that's useful, for me.
What goes wrong? Because all of us begin life, I think this is largely true, reading and loving poems, right? As children, we're read, people read to us, and they're mostly poems for a couple of years, and we like them. And then it drifts away pretty fast. By high school and college, we're not reading collections of poems anymore. And most of us never go back. Why?
Well, I wrote a lot about this in the book and then cut it out because I'm actually not a historian of education. I don't really know the answer.
You think you know.
Well, I have some ideas about it, but I don't, and I actually read a lot of textbooks. I don't know how many of you all, this book by Cleanth Brooks and Robert Penn Warren called Understanding Poetry. You're familiar with this book? It's sold like 5 million copies. It's the most popular poetry textbook. I'm sure there are people in this room who had it in high school. There's absolutely no way there isn't. But anyway, I read this book and wrote 15,000 words about the problems with it, and then realized that this was the most boring thing in the world to read. So I cut the whole thing out. And in the book, I just say these textbooks are problematic. Trust me. And so because I was, but yeah, no, I think they replicate a lot of the problems that I'm talking about there, and plus, no one likes to be. I mean, who wants to be made to feel stupid? I mean, it's that's another problem with the way poems are taught. It's like people don't get asked. There's a way to talk about them that pushes people to read more deeply and carefully. That's more respectful. Or just like, what do we think about this? I mean, there's nothing more exciting in a classroom for me than dealing with this little square area of the text and kind of digging into it and figuring out, okay, what's the poet actually saying, and what's the next thing, and why do you think they went from here to there, or whatever. That's so exciting, and it's this collective kind of exploration of the poem. It's such an amazing experience. But I've also seen poems taught in this way where it's like, well, what does it mean? And if you don't figure out the big secret and repeat it, then you're wrong and you're made to feel stupid or whatever. And that's not a good feeling. And I think that people don't like that. So they transfer that resentment to poetry.
Yes, I agree.
So that's one thing that happens, but probably other things happen too.
You said when you were young, you had the vague impression that poets use poetic language and techniques to express important thoughts or ideas in a more beautiful or complex or compressed way than prose.
Yeah, I thought that's what poems were. I mean, if you had asked me, I would have said, yeah, it's just wisdom. It's wisdom in pretty language, I guess,
So what does poetry do better, and specifically, than other forms of literature?
That's what a lot of the book tries to account for. I think one thing it does is that it takes the material of language that we're also familiar with, and it doesn't submit to any need that we usually have for language. We usually have the need for language to communicate information, like I'm doing right now, or to give us information that we really need, or to convince us of something, or to whatever. Poems I think they liberate themselves from all those obligations and explore what the material of language itself can do when it's freed from those obligations. That's if I were going to define a poem, that's what I would say. But that doesn't mean that poems don't communicate information, or convince or tell stories. They do, of course. I mean, you can see that in the poems that I read. They sometimes do. Right. But it just means they only do it as long as they feel like it, and then they do something else. There's this famous, I'm sure this principle of Chekhov's gun. This idea that if in playwriting or fiction writing, like if the gun is on the wall in the first act, then it has to go off by the end of the play. Well, poets don't care about that stuff. The gun doesn't have to go off in a poem. Like, it's not that we don't live by those rules. We do what's beautiful. And if it's beautiful to mention the gun and never say anything about it again, that's what we're going to do. And if you want your plot, you can go somewhere else.
In one of your poems, you write, "I'm thinking about the hidden reasons I love something small." Seems like a great line about what a poem can do. To think deeply and clearly and cleverly about something small we might not consider otherwise. In another poem, you refer to your father playing the guitar and communicating many contradictory things, which also seems like you're talking about what a poem can do.
Yeah, and I mean, that poem, it's like I'm thinking about my dad and that mystery of another person that you're close to, but like suddenly you see them as if from a great distance, like all the things you don't know about them, especially a parent.
Right.
You know, you have those moments where you're like, God, I don't know my parents at all. Like, I have no idea who they are. You know, they're these people who have this whole lives so that thing, and I guess maybe the contradictory nature of their feelings might be.
Why don't you read a poem called Pocket?
Yeah, sure. These are all really good questions. I want to ask you questions. Might happen. Pocket.
Because I wonder if a poem is like a pocket. That's what I'm going to ask you when we're done.
Yeah. Well, I think that is maybe sort of the kind of,
Point of the poem?
not the point of the poem, but the sort of like
The secret?
That's a secret meaning. You can pass on the test. You can get an A. Okay, pocket. I like the word pocket. It sounds a little safely dangerous, like knowing you once bought a headlamp in case the lights go out in a catastrophe. You will put it on your head and your hands will still be free. Or standing in a forest and staring at a picture in a plant book while eating scary-looking wildflowers. Saying pocket makes me feel potentially, but not yet busy. I'm getting ready to have important thoughts. I'm thinking about my pocket, which has its own particular geology. Maybe you know what I mean. I basically know what's in there and can even list the items, but also there are other bits and pieces made of stuff that might not even have a name. Only a scientist could figure it out. And why would a scientist do that? He or she should be curing brain diseases or making sure that asteroid doesn't hit us. Look out, scientists. Today, the unemployment rate is 9.4%. I have no idea what that means. I tried to think about it harder for a while, then tried standing in an actual stance of mystery and not knowing toward the world, which is my job. As is staring at the backyard and for 1 second believing I am actually rising away from myself, which is maybe what I have in common right now with you. And now I'm placing my hand on this very dusty table and brushing away the dust. And now I'm looking away and thinking for the last time about my pocket. But this time I'm thinking about its darkness, like the bottom of the sea, but without the blind fluorescent creatures floating in a circle around the black box, which along with tremendous thunder and huge shards of metal from the airplane sank down and settled here where it rests, cheerfully beeping. And it's so amoral to end, like just
Why?
I don't know, just like it just like imagining that huge plane crash. It just doesn't even mention all the people that died, and it's like just interested in the beep of the black box. It's really, it's terrible. Yeah, Richard Hugo is a poet he has this great line where he says the imagination is a cynic, which I think is a great, I think there's a way that the artist is like a magpie. Is a magpie the bird that just
picks things up?
Yeah, like just like, oh, that's interesting, and that's interesting, and like doesn't really care, that much like about the bigger picture somehow. That you have to. There's some way you have to be like that a little bit when you're making art. You just have to be interested in what's beautiful on some level, like and that just cracked me up when I read that, because it was like, oh God, it's so like. I mean, no actual planes were harmed in the making of this film, but I mean, still, it's like a little bit, like.
That's such a humble image when you talk. Basically, I know what's in there. I can even list the items, but it's also other bits and pieces made of stuff that might not even have a name. It strikes me as a metaphor of the poem itself. That basically what's in the poem, but you don't know everything that's in the poem.
Yeah.
The poet does not entirely understand his own creation.
Well, that's true. That's for sure true. I mean, I think that's when it gets exciting, when it starts to get a little bit out of your control. Rob and I were talking about this downstairs a little bit, that when you feel the poem start to escape your control, and then if you've done it for a while, you can sort of let it go farther and farther and still maintain some kind of, there's probably some analogy with other human behaviors here, but like you can kind of let it go more and more and still keep it together.
Right.
And how far you can let it go and still keep it together is exciting.
But there are parts of the poem that whose implications you are not controlling.
I think that that's the point of the poems for me. That's why I write them, because I want the poem to provide a space for those moments to exist when I don't understand what's going on. You know, I need that. Not understand. I don't mean don't understand like in a semantic way. I mean, I understand what the words mean, but why they feel significant to me.
Right. Toward the end of your book, Why Poetry, you talk about the danger of trying to use poetry for overtly political purposes.
Yeah, I mean, well, and stalling.
We have seen since the election a lot of very overtly political poetry. Some of it is obvious and bad. Some of it is very emotionally powerful. What is the dividing line between when it works and when it's just kind of everybody preaching to the choir about how horrible such and such is?
Rob and I have an ongoing conversation about this. I mean, first of all, I think when I said that it was, I think my point is that political material is difficult to manage in a poem.
Yes.
Because it can swamp other things. And I think that was sort of what my
And it becomes
point
obvious.
Right. I mean, obvious isn't so, for me, obviousness isn't such a problem. Like, I don't mind if things are obvious, actually, and really direct. It's more that becomes ugly, but not, and again, I mean, it's not that I want everything to be fancy language or beautiful, but it's somehow lifeless. And so, you know, it has no movement. It doesn't move. It isn't alive feeling. Right. And I think that when the poem just becomes just this inert thing on the page of mutual agreement.
Yes.
I think part of okay, you want to know what I really think the problem is? I think the problem is that in a lot of these political poems that I've read that aren't good, they start from a place of certainty, and they don't, which isn't, that in of itself isn't a problem. That could be fine, but they don't change. They're just reiterations of the same idea over and over again until you get to the end, and they're just they're static, basically. Yeah. Like that's more the issue that I have with them. Like so it's not the certainty, it's not the subject matter, it's not the passion or commitment. In fact, those things can be really great in art. It's that they don't move. You know, they're lifeless.
Read a poem called Canada.
Yeah, speaking of political poem, deeply political poem. Yeah. I think this poem.
It's one of my favorites.
Oh, thanks.
Are you about to say how you don't?
No. I was going to say that I think I wrote
Whether
this.
You got it off the back of cereal boxes.
No. This is all me. It's written during the George W.'s presidency, and I think there was a lot of talk at the time about, you know, we should all go to Canada, or Canada's so great. Canada's a healthcare system, you know. So I was feeling a little resentful of Canada. Canada. By Canada, I have always been fascinated. All that snow and acquiescing, all that emptiness, all those butterflies marshaled into an army of peace. Moving north away from me, Canada has no border. Away like the state, its northern border withers into the sky dome. In a world full of mistrust and self-medication, I've always hated Canada. It makes me feel like I'm shouting at a child for letting a handful of pine needles run through his fist. Canada gets along with everyone while I hang, a dark cloud above the schoolyard. I know we need war, all the skirmishes to keep our borders where we've placed them, all the migration, all the difference. Just like Canada, the Dalai Lama is now in Canada, and everyone is fascinated. When they come to visit me, no one ever leaves me saying, the most touching thing about him is he's so human. or I was really glad to hear so many positive ideas regardless of the consequences expressed. Or I could drink a case of you. No one has ever peddled every inch of thousands of roads through me to raise awareness for my struggle for autonomy. I have pity but no respect for others, which is not compassion, just ordinary love based on attitudes towards myself. I wonder how long I can endure. In Canada, the leaves are falling. When they do, each one rustles, maybe, to the white-tailed deer of sadness. And it's clear that whole country does not exist to make me feel crappy, like a candelabra hanging above the prison world, condemned to freely glow.
The canon of anti-Canada poems is
Sentiment.
small.
Yeah, but deeply, deeply,
Deeply felt.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be a very small anthology of anti-Canada poems.
It's a very witty poem, and it does what you were just talking about, the way it challenges certainty, disrupts our certainty, disrupts political attitudes and ideas in very complicated and
Can I tell you one funny thing about
witty
that poem?
ways. Yes.
I read that poem once in Canada, and as I was leaving the room where I read it, I heard one person say to another, "Did he say white-tailed deer of sadness?" It's like, no, you heard wrong, completely wrong. I would never say anything like that.
Well, let's stand up for just a few minutes, turn around, sit back down. The chairs are a bit hard.
I like it. I like a little yoga.
Okay, let's sit down. It's not really an intermission.
Did you get that from your wife?
I did from my
Yeah, I
wife,
bet
yes.
you did. That's like
She
a
said
total teacher trick.
The kids cannot sit this long.
Yeah,
Ron.
the kids cannot sit this long.
You got to stand up.
That's
Yeah,
right.
she's a
Total
master
teacher trick.
She's a master teacher.
Right. At least be grateful he's not making you do yoga. Do that. Sometimes they'll do that.
As far as I can tell, you're the first poetry editor, or at least, we had other poets who edited things, but the first person who actually does this professionally. And I have to say, the idea of editing a poem just sounds completely mysterious to me. I mean, I edit all day long, and I take people's reviews of books, and I just make them smoother or clearer, or try to bring out their voice. But it seems to me that any editing you would do to a poem would be real violence to it. So how do you do that?
It can be. You have to be careful. It's easy to go too far. I mean, the kinds of suggestions that would be totally appropriate to make in a piece of prose would not be good to, because the choice of the word, the particular choice of the words is so intimately related to the effect of the poem that you can't just say, well, you can't say candelabra there. Why don't you just say candle holder or something? I mean, it's like, because those, but there are, when somebody writes a book of poems, I edit books of poems. So I'm looking at a group of work.
Right.
So there's conversations you can have about, well, in this poem, you can compare this poem to the other poem and say, see, in this one, you do such a good job of this, but here you lose focus in this line, or this is a little confusing, or you seem to miss what you're trying to get at here. Can you go back and clarify? Can you make it better, or whatever, like that?
Can people do that?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So because what happens when you write poems is that you get lost. You don't know what you're doing anymore. They go through so many revisions, and there's so many different things, and so you can forget that in earlier drafts it was totally obvious that you were sitting in a restaurant, but it's not obvious anymore. You forgot. It's just, it because you're writing the poem, but you forgot to mention it. So you read the poem, and like, where is this happening? And they're like, oh, it's in a restaurant. You're like, well, you don't say that. Like, how nobody's going to know that? Oh, right. That would be, maybe I should call this in the restaurant. That would help here. Stuff like that. Yeah. So it's things like that, or also just sometimes, a lot of times poets will go on a bit long in their poems, or take a bit of a time to get started. And so you can say, it's a very annoying. Anybody who's been in a poetry workshop knows this is the most annoying thing. One of the top 80 annoying things people can say. That I think the poem really starts here, or it should end up here. But that is actually true.
It's certainly common. The stuff I edit.
Right.
We often see the lead really is several paragraphs down.
Right. So it's the same thing with poems.
It's a lot of throat clearing.
I always say it's like the Flintstones. Remember the Flintstones, and like where he's like, where he does the thing with his feet. He's in the car, and then the car goes.
Right.
It's like that with poems sometimes. Like there's a little bit of this, and then So you can just say to the person, like, hey, it's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just put your finger over the first like 3 lines of this poem. Just see what that looks like. And sometimes, especially, they'll trust me because I will have read a lot of their work and I know what I'm talking about. So if I suggest it, they might actually, I might just go home and sit with it, see what I see this. And also with books of poems, poets often don't realize that there's a couple that aren't as good.
Right.
So you're like, you should take these out. They're just not as good.
Or one is really a revision of another poem.
That happens a lot,
Yeah.
too. And the interesting thing about that is that sometimes individually they can be great, but when you put them in the book, you realize they're the kind of same poem
Right.
twice. And they might have been fine when they were separate,
Right.
but together they can't both be there because they're basically the same thing. So it's like you got to make a choice.
Right.
Sophie's choice.
In one of your poems, you write, "I'm at my desk, pushing against one word, feeling its hinge creak like wind would a gate if it could feel anything at all." It's a great description of writing or editing, I think. Just pushing on one word, seeing what it
Right.
can take, what it
Yeah.
opens up.
Yeah, I mean I don't know if prose writers do the same thing. Do they do the same thing like
Good
that?
ones. Yeah.
Like even a single word like
yeah.
that? Yeah.
You frequently write about sleep in your poems. And I've read all your poems in a row.
To make you sleepy?
No, not at all. But I'm sure you've never
Read them all in a
all
row.
in a row,
Yeah.
have you?
No.
No. So it gave me a perspective that is, I think, somewhat unusual. And sleep is a recurring theme in your work. Why is that?
Well, more recently, it was a recurring theme in my work because I have a young child. So, but I think I've always loved the surrealists, and I think that their whole idea that the dream space and the liminal space between waking and sleeping,
Yes.
and the movement from waking into sleeping, and that transition. There's the what starts to happen to your mind, like that's intimately connected with the experience of both writing and reading poetry. So I think I'm interested in. But I mean, I joked about Keats earlier, but Keats is my favorite poet, and for him, sleep and death were so closely aligned to, so I think that's probably part of it also.
Right. Yeah. No, I would say that's true from my experience.
But the honest answer to your question is I don't really know why.
There's several poems that begin waking up
Yeah.
or falling asleep in that transitional liminal moment there,
Right.
where you seem to be saying something about getting away from your conscious mind, getting away from your own anxieties to something freer or more mysterious to yourself.
Yeah, or in an associative space, like a space where you can connect ideas that you wouldn't connect if you were busy in your conscious life trying to
Right.
function
Right.
and do things. You have to be logical and keep your act together. But like once that starts to slip a little bit, there's a lot of truth that can be found in that type of thinking, and that's the thinking of poetry for me.
Right. Without opium.
Without opium,
Yeah.
it's totally opium free.
Yeah,
These books of poems.
Because that's a
Yeah,
a dead end, by the way.
That is what I've heard. I just gonna trust you on that one.
I want you to read a poem without intimacy.
Yeah, this is gonna prove your thesis.
Yes.
Poem without intimacy. The other day I was shopping in one of those giant, incredibly brightly lit stores you can apparently see from space, wheeling a massive empty cart, thinking, this is a lot like thinking, why do I go to sleep, not having brushed my teeth, and dream of the giant failure known as high school again. On the loudspeaker was a familiar song by Quicksilver Messenger Service. There were no lyrics, but I remember it says, we are all skyscrapers under one blue rectangle that never chose us to be these sentinels who imperceptibly sway and watch people far below like tiny devices no one controls enter our various sunlit glass conversations. The world is old and full, as it always will be, of commerce and its hopeful nonprofit mitigations. Future products from the Amazon will cure ailments we have and also ones not yet invented. Looking down, I saw my cart was full of a few boxes of some cereal I do not recognize, 4 flashlights, and a pink plastic water bottle made of some kind of vegetable that will eventually, like me, into the earth harmlessly decompose. And then I passed an entire row of plastic flowers and wanted to be the sort of person who bought them all. But really, I am a runway covered in grass, and all I truly love is sleep. Yeah. I wrote that poem for Juan Felipe Herrera, the former poet laureate.
The most striking strategy in your poems that I observed is this sudden shift from very ordinary details to something very profound without any warning at all. You see it in this poem all the time, moving from the the things in the shopping cart to some much larger idea. How conscious is that?
I think not very, but I just think that I think that's how people think in general.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you were to just somehow be able to see into someone's mind, I think you would see them rapidly moving between, mundane thoughts or observations or visual impressions and big thoughts,
Right.
or just or scary thoughts or some kind of, emotional impressions or something. I think that's kind of how people. And for me, the poem replicates and attempts to implicate the reader in that process so that we can experience it in a more conscious way.
Mm-hmm.
I compare it in the Why Poetry book to lucid dreaming,
Mm-hmm.
which I've never actually been able to achieve. Apparently, there's some people who can wake up in their dream. There's probably people in this room who can do it. Can you do it?
No, but I've read about it too.
Yeah, you can wake up in your dream and move around and fly and everything on purpose and something. But poems are kind of like that. They're I think they can be.
Right. You have a poem called White Castle where you describe thinking major feelings such as longing for purpose while eating little square hamburgers with dots in them.
Yeah.
Watching dragonflies mate. It's often charming and funny the way you move between those two things. Read a poem called Erstwhile Harbinger Auspices.
Mm-hmm. That's the first poem in that book.
Yeah. That's a tough title, too.
Well, do you want to hear a story about this poem? Yes. Do you guys like hearing the stories, or is it recommended? Okay. Well, if you insist. This poem, I had gone to a party with a bunch of writers. I just moved to San Francisco, and I didn't know them, but it was first fancy writer party I'd been invited to, so I felt it was high stakes. And somebody used the word erstwhile, or I think I used the word erstwhile, and someone corrected me my usage of it. I know, and I took umbrage and defended my usage of it, but because everybody has phones now, they could look up what it meant. It turned out I was not correct in my usage of erstwhile, which I thought, well, whatever. It means it was a long time ago that it happened, but I did not use it that way. I thought it was continuing to happen. I was wrong, basically. Must we go into it again? Okay. But so then I started thinking about other words whose name that I use that I don't actually know what they mean or are incorrect, and then I just kind of constructed the title of the poem out of 3 of those words. So the title is called Erstwhile Harbinger Auspices. Erstwhile means long time gone. A harbinger is sent before to help, and also a sign of things to come. Like this blue stapler I bought at Staples. Did you know? It's hard when someone's laughing next to you. It's great. I feel like this blue stapler I bought at Staples. Did you know in ancient Rome, priests called augurs studied the future by carefully watching whether birds were flying together or alone, making what honking or beeping noises in what directions? It was called the auspices. The air was thus a huge announcement. Today, it's completely transparent, a vase. Inside it, flowers flower. Thus, a little death scent. I have no master, but always wonder what is making my master sad. Maybe I do not know him. This morning, I made extra coffee for the beloved and covered the cup with a saucer. Skeleton, I thought, and stay very still. Whatever it was will soon pass by and be gone.
The juxtaposition of the ordinary and the profound is funny in that poem, and creates a kind of tension and mystery that keeps drawing us through. So many of your poems, the words are quite clear, and we all know the words, but the sense of them escapes us. With a poem like that, for instance, by the end, you've taken us somewhere very, very different. It's become very intimate suddenly. Take us through that poem.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, the structure of it is just kind of examining those those words. I mean, it's almost crude, the structure of it, because I just sort of define the words. You know, I just say what they mean, like in the dictionary, and then I say it, and then I think, oh, what does that suggest to me, or can I? The blue stapler I bought at Staples, I just wrote that and thought that was funny. I mean, it was, you know, kind of, and the idea that that would be a harbinger, you know, like that's, because it kind of is. You're at Staples and you're like, you will buy a stapler, you know, it's like, it seems ordained because of the name of the store. But anyway, you know, and then I just was sort of, yeah, kind of going through what these words mean, but then looking for things that suggests, you know, doorways or pathways or whatever, like you're saying. So that's really just how I write. I'm looking for that other place I can go. I mean, when I taught composition, I remember saying to my students, you know, the thing is when your papers, they're just a hallway, and you're just charging down the hallway as fast as you can go. Yes. But you're rushing past all these doors. And why don't you stop and like open the door and go in and see what's in the room, and then go down a little bit, see what's in the room. Stop, think. You know, don't just go charging through. And I think that for me, the poem is exciting because I out of the corner of my eye see a door, and I'm going to stop and open it and go in. And a lot of the time I go in and there's nothing in there. And then I go back out and those lines go away. You know, it's not like that. I mean, most of the time that's true, but in the poem, it's got this, the times when there's something interesting in that room, you know, then that's, so it has this, I think it has this quality of moving, but then stopping and digressing, but not losing the forward momentum totally, you know. And always the ends surprise me. I mean, the ends always surprise me. I don't know where they're going. I have no idea where they're going. And that, yeah. And I don't know, the word skeleton just appeared in that poem. And then I thought, oh, well, that's a strange thing to have happen. And it's a little scary. And then maybe if I just wait a little while, I won't feel scared anymore. You know, I mean, that's all. I don't know if that might be a very small thought or a big one, but yes. Or somewhere in between.
Could you read the poem Prelude?
Yes.
That's a pretty weighty title to give a poem.
Yeah. Well, I'm an English professor, as Rob mentioned, and you know, but I don't have a traditional training in it, which just means I've barely read anything. And so I decided at some point that I should read Wordsworth because I'm an English professor. It seemed like probably
you should. Yes.
Yeah. And so I started reading the Prelude, which is really good, by the way. And but it's hard. It's really hard to read it. So it took. Has anybody read the Prelude in here? It's hard, you know. It's really, the language is very complicated. You got to like really grind through, or at least I did. And so over a few days of trying to read the beginning of the Prelude, his language really started to like seep into my own brain.
Yes.
And then I just decided to write this. I thought, oh, I should just write a poem with the same title, which kind of takes on his diction a little bit. But it was almost involuntary because after reading it for a few days, I couldn't stop thinking in these Wordsworthian like sentences, which sound absurd if you don't pull them off exactly. So and the first line of this poem is an imitation of the first line of the Prelude. The first line of Wordsworth's Prelude is, "Oh, there is blessing in this gentle breeze." That's how his poem begins. So this is the Prelude. "Oh, this Diet Coke is really good. Though, come to think of it, it tastes like nothing plus the idea of chocolate. Or an acquaintance of chocolate speaking fondly of certain times it and chocolate had spoken of nothing. Or nothing, remembering a field in which it once ate the most wondrous sandwich of ham and rustic chambered cheese, yet still wished for a piece of chocolate before the lone walk back through the corn, then the darkening forest, to the disappointing village and its super creepy bed and breakfast. With secret despair, I returned to the city. Something seemed to be waiting for me. Maybe the chosen guide Wordsworth wrote. He would, even were it nothing better than a wandering cloud, have followed, which of course to me and everyone sounds amazing. All I follow is my own desire, sometimes to feel, sometimes to be at least a little more than intermittently at ease with being loved. I'm never at ease, not with hours I can read or walk and look at the brightly colored houses filled with lives, not with night when I lie on my back and listen, not with the hallway, definitely not with baseball, definitely not with time. Poor Coleridge, son of a vicar and a lake, He could not feel the energy, no present joy, no cheerful confidence, just love of friends and the wind taking his arrow away. Come to the edge beckons softly. Take this cup full of darkness and stay as long as you want, and maybe a little longer.
It's such a clever and provocative response to Wordsworth and to that romantic tradition. It starts off pretty caustic and sarcastic and funny, and then it ends in a much more tender, much more accepting, in a much more personal way. But there is a lot of your poems are about nature in that romantic tradition. You write about nature all the time, in a way that is clearly, you could draw a line from Wordsworth to some of your poems. You've got a poem called Tiburon. Could you read that?
This is from my first book. Tiburon, which is the name of a town across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. How sweet to lie just once like a painter, propped at the top of that hill on my elbow, considering the conundrum of breath. Grasses blow among my limbs, as if wisdom had been withdrawn for safekeeping into the library of fragments. I have no purpose except to return back down towards a eucalyptus I love. Its petals are filled with the terrible weight of careless reversal, grief without consequence. It burns with such ease. Just to stand there below it, dreaming of union, all trembling in scent and colors of the moment, is like living inside a flower while making a study of winter. Blue span that leads to a gleaming city, you cannot be crossed by longing.
And another one from that collection called American Linden. This is the title poem of the collection.
American linden, which is a kind of tree, you probably know. American linden. When you'd like to remember the notion of days, turn to the barn asleep on its hill, a red shoulder holding the weight of clouds. You could stand still for so many moments. So little is over and over required, letting the wind brush your crown. The lathes of tobacco swing into autumn. Swallows already discuss the winter. I know you are tired of imagination, all that clumsily grasping the sunlight. Aren't you tired of bodies too? Whenever it rains, they fall from the sky and darken your window. Clutching each other, they call out names, while you sit in the circle thrown by a lamp and pretend they are leaves. The potatoes cringe and bury their heads. Do you see them? They know where to return when hoofbeats come. Like you, they were not born with pride. They were born with skins made of earth. Their eyes are black, and they sing out of tune, quietly under the snow.
What do you think of that poem now, years after writing it?
That's great. That's exactly what I was thinking when I was reading it. I was a different person when I wrote that poem.
This is not a poem you would write now.
No, but I like it. It's because I think it's brave. I think it's like it has the bravery of a young poet, where I just say stuff and I say these big pronouncements and then I move on to the next thing, and it feels very sincere.
Yes.
Actually, like super sincere, which I really like. And I think it's I'm not a person who goes around liking my own poems, whatever, but I'm surprised that I liked reading that in front of other people now. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's another thing about it is that it does remind me of Eastern and Central European poets who were very influential and important to me, and the sort of animation, the way that I animate these potatoes and leaves and trees, whatever, that sort of pantheistic animating of the landscape is I think something that came to me from this this European tradition. It's more than an American one.
There's no sarcasm in that poem.
No.
Really. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
Again and again, we see trees in your poems, we see bees, we see lots of birds. What is nature? How does nature function in your work, do you think? Or how did it?
Well, I mean, that poem I wrote when I was in graduate school in Amherst, Massachusetts. I also was an undergrad in Amherst too. So
It's a beautiful setting.
yeah, and it's America's very young for our civilization of America is obviously very young compared to other places.
Right.
I mean, America itself is not young, the landscape, but that feels like an old part of America to me compared to some other places. And so I felt the history in that place a lot of the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that for me, I also am scared of nature. Like I get scared when I go out into the, I'm like, I don't understand what's going on a lot of the time. And I feel like I didn't grow up, camping or going for hikes and stuff like that. So for me, it's a very like weird experience to do that stuff. So, I'm very aware of like all the way that the landscape feels alive to me.
Interesting.
You
You once told an interviewer, a lot of poets are terrible readers.
Yeah.
Often they go on too long and they choose the wrong poems to read.
Yeah.
You're a great reader of your own poetry, I have to say. Could you quickly close with a poem that I just love? I'm not fitting it in thematically here. I just think it's a great poem to end on, called Letter to a Lover.
Yeah.
Where is
That's in here.
There it is.
Yeah, this is a love poem that I wrote to my wife early in our relationship. So, and there's actually I have a friend whose name is Gabe Kahane. He's a composer, brilliant composer, and he did some musical settings in my poems. And actually, he and this band, this chamber orchestra called Brooklyn Rider, did this amazing recording of this, and the best recording of it is on YouTube, and they're in a hotel room just doing it, and they're playing, and he sings it and plays it.
Oh, wow.
So if you like the poem, you can go see it. Letter to a Lover. Today, I'm going to pick you up at the beige airport. My heart feels like a field of calves in the sun. My heart is wired directly to the power source of mediocre songs. I'm trying to catch a ray of sunlight in my mouth. I look forward to showing you my new furniture. I look forward to the telephone ringing. It is not you. You are in the kitchen trying to figure out the coffee maker. You are pouring out the contents of your backpack. I wonder if you now have golden fur. I wonder if your arsenal of kind remarks is empty. I remember when I met you, you were wearing a gray dress that was also blue, not unlike the water plus the sky. They say it's difficult to put a leash on a hummingbird. So let us be no longer the actuary of each other. Let us bow no longer our heads to the tyranny of numbers. Hurry off the plane with your rhinestone-covered bag full of magazines that check up on the downfall of the stars. I will be waiting for you at the bottom of the moving stairs.
It's just so lovely.
Thanks. And then I ended up married. That's what
I would
happens.
marry
Be
you.
careful. I do.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Ron.
much
Thank
for
you
coming.
so much. Thank all of you.
Matthew would love to talk to you. There are books for sale out in the lobby. Please. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.